Sing the song of ages to the Lamb. Let's sing that together again. Again, don't worry if you don't have all the melody right. I know it's new. The words are what matters. 1,000 generations falling down in worship to sing the song of ages to the Lamb. And all who've gone before us, all who will believe will sing the song of ages to the Lamb. Your name is the highest, 'cause your name is the highest. Your name is the greatest. Your name stands above them all thrones and dominions, all powers and possessions. Your name stands above them all, and the angels cry, holy, all creation cries, holy, you are lifted high, holy, holy forever. Hear your people sing, hear your people sing, holy to the King of Kings, holy, you will always be, holy, holy forever. You've been forgiven.
You've been forgiven, and if you've been redeemed, sing a song forever to the Lamb. If you walk in freedom, and if you bear His name, sing a song forever to the Lamb. We'll sing a song forever and amen. Your name is the highest. Your name is the highest. Your name is the greatest. Your name stands above them all thrones and dominions, all powers and positions. Your name stands above them all, and the angels cry, holy, all creation cries, holy, you are lifted high, holy, holy forever. Hear your people sing, hear your people sing, holy to the King of Kings, holy, you will always be, holy, holy forever. You will always be. You will always be holy, holy forever. Holy, holy, holy.
excited to be sharing again. I will give the same recap that I typically do. I'm forcing myself to go through the book of Luke this year, and I'm forcing myself to speak about it no matter what. This is part 2. I spoke 2 weeks ago, and the idea, we were looking at Luke chapter 7, 36 to 50, and the idea was pretty simple. We're pretty easy to judge people when we start to use labels to describe those people, or labels to describe ourselves. And this morning, I am not moving any further. We're going to look at this same story, but from another perspective again, because it's just, I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Last time I told you I did not enjoy reading this story. I did not want to speak about it, and those are the ones that typically you just have too much to say about it. So let's keep chatting about it this morning. Finish this phrase with me, okay? Ready? There's some participation here. You get out what you put in. You get out what you put in. Thank you. You get out what you put in. This quote has been used forever, it feels like, and for so many different aspects of our lives, right? It's about working out, about eating healthy, about motivating yourself at school or to accomplish different goals. We use this phrase, you get out what you put in so many different areas, but when I reflect on myself and when I seem to say this phrase the most, it's in response to learning experiences, or what we used to maybe call a missions trip with students. We are, or last year, it's really funny timing. Laura and Mark, they found some old cards from our Montreal trip last summer, and I was reflecting on it this week. And it's been so fun to reflect on that experience. We brought 10 students and 4 leaders to Montreal for a week of learning and serving and growing. What did we do, guys? We ate Argentinian food. We ate Afghan food. There's a lot of food there. We served in urban garden projects. We learned about the difficulties of homelessness in the wintertime, the extra difficulties. We had all of these different experiences. I mean, we met this indigenous-led homelessness group that was supporting people on the streets, I think 3 or 4 days a week. It was amazing. This is going to bring back some interesting memories to the team. We biked all across the city. Oh, yeah. All across the city, like too far across the city where it was problematic.
Yeah, a little bit too much biking there.
A little bit too much biking. In our guides, on his behalf, he told us previously, I've got a great 10-kilometer loop for you, and I think 40 kilometers later, we still had 10 more to go.
That's right.
And so, that was an experience. We're planning to travel back to Montreal, not this summer, but next summer in July of 2024. And so I found myself reflecting on all the previous experiences that I've been a part of, being a leader on these learning experiences. And so I started to do the math, and it would be in 12 years, 102 students on 8 trips. And there's so much diversity in the experiences, in the type of students, in the demographics, in their upbringing, in what they're hoping to get out of the trip. It was so diverse and unique, but without a doubt, the difference between it being a life-changing experience and it being a vacation is the phrase, you get out what you put in. One trip really solidified this for me. So at this point in my life, I was a student. I forget what, 16 maybe? And I was having this long experience with God, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted to believe or not believe. And so this trip will always be solidified in my memory because, this is the trip that I decided that the way of Jesus was what I wanted to follow. This is the trip where I decided I was feeling called to ministry by God. And this trip is also the one that firmly solidified the phrase, you get out what you put in. We were in the Dominican Republic, and we were serving an underserved group of indigenous Dominicans that lived in the nearby garbage dump beside the resort. And we were there with a group of doctors, and the premise was really simple. We would run soccer camps for the kids while their parents were getting medical supplies, hygiene packs. They were getting medical assistance, and we just kind of bounced around and helped and set up these clinics. The really interesting thing about this trip for me is the wide range of ages and demographics on this trip. So we had high school students, we had these doctors, we had the doctors' kids. I think the youngest maybe was 4 or 5. We had the elders of the church. It was such an interesting range of people. And one of the people that decided to come on this trip was looking to volunteer, but this person was also an avid photographer. And so he wanted to document what we were doing during our time in the Dominican. And so we would be setting up camps and medical clinics and handing out hygiene packs, and he would be taking pictures of it. And at the end of the week, or I guess it was longer than a week, at the end of our time together, as we were all debriefing and probably, crying and excited and having all these stories to tell and getting really excited about this experience, the conversation came to this guy, and he said, I've got some awesome pictures to show you. And he showed us these heartbreaking pictures of kids and us playing and laughter and tears and all of the stuff that we were reflecting. And we said, and how was your experience? And he said, oh, it was an okay trip. It was fine. There seemed to be a disconnect between looking at someone between your eyes that are connected to your heart and looking at someone through the lens of a camera connected to an SD card. Just because he was there doesn't mean he was there. Just because he had the same experiences as us doesn't mean he had an experience. If you get what I'm saying. He missed it. He had the same opportunity. He had everything offered that was offered to us. And he didn't get it. He didn't get it. And so you get out what you put in. This has been solidified in my brain. And so every time I lead a learning experience with students, I'm sorry to say it to the people coming next time, you're going to hear my spiel about you get out what you put in. Because that, for me, is the difference between a learning experience that can be life-changing and your 30 hours of community service. Same trip, same cost, same time commitment, but totally, totally different experience. You get out what you put in. I feel like this side is important. I do want to be clear as I'm talking this morning. I'm not saying that God only shows up when we put effort in. I'm not trying to confuse us and say it's all about what we do in our faith. That's not the point this morning, okay? God shows up in miraculous ways. It is not what we do in our faith. It's what God has done for us already and continues to do for us. But I think for me, you get out what you put in is more about, have you given vulnerability? Are you willing to be vulnerable in these moments to say, I want to experience God. I want to notice God. I want to remind myself that God is already here and now I get to have that experience. It's not about what we do. I think it's about removing barriers so that we can have these life-changing moments, so that we can be open to God's presence in our lives. And so, Luke chapter 7, 36 to 50. We read a story about Jesus at a dinner party. A Pharisee invites Jesus to recline at his table and eat this really fancy meal. And in that culture, it literally meant to recline. And so they would be laying on their side on the ground. The table was kind of at, knee height or something. And you would be laying with your head towards the table and your feet away. And you would be eating all of the great things that weren't in your normal diet, right? They're eating grapes. They're eating meat. That was a really big treat for them. Maybe they're having a glass of wine and they are having conversation. In these situations, this was the place where you had conversations about politics, about Jewish tradition, about theology, about big things that were happening. And so Jesus gets invited to this table. He has a seat at the table, and he starts to have conversation and starts to share the food. But as you read this story in Luke chapter 7, it's unclear, why was Jesus invited to this? Why was he invited into this situation? Because although he has a place at the table, it's very clear that he doesn't belong at this table. They're kind of holding him at arm's length. He's not there to be a part of the conversation. He's there to be studied in the conversation. And so they're holding him at arm's length. And one of the reasons we know that he was held at arm's length is because it would have been customary in that culture to have some hospitality for your guests, especially important guests, right? In Middle Eastern, first century hospitality, you would show up, maybe they would have a servant wash your feet, maybe you would get some oil in your hair, on your forehead, they would put perfume or ointment on your feet because you've been outside, and Jesus doesn't get any of that. It's very clear that they're trying to set the tone at this conversation and say, again, just because you're here doesn't mean you belong. We're going to be studying you. We're going to be analyzing you. We're going to make sure that we are in charge of what is discussed. And so this is the dinner party that we find in this story. The other thing that I think is really cool and important to know in this story, in the context, is that at these dinner parties, anyone could show up. There's no doors on the buildings. There would typically be a courtyard with windows. And so this is the place, right? This is where excitement is happening, where conversation and guests are coming. And so people from the community were allowed to come in, but again, from a distance. You can't participate, you can't enjoy the food, you can't interact with any of the special guests, but you can be there. You can see what's going to happen, and behold is the word that they use in this story, and I like it. There's a normal dinner party happening, and then all of a sudden, enter stage right, this lady shows up to the party, and maybe she wasn't noticed at first. Maybe she's just kind of hanging out in the background, but eventually she decides, I need to do something. And so she rushes up to Jesus. She starts cleaning his feet. She starts washing his feet with her tears. She pours this oil or perfume on his feet. I mean, she's the one doing the hospitality that the homeowner should have been doing this whole time. She is the one giving the hospitality. And we don't know much about this person, but here's what we do know, okay? Here's what we do know. She is a woman from the city. She enters the home, and people know her. Her reputation kind of precedes her. Some scholars would say maybe she's a prostitute. I really like the idea that maybe she's married to a wealthy tax collector. And she comes to this party, and it's clear. She's disliked by everyone. And number two, she had enough money to purchase a very, very, very expensive bottle of perfume. It's called an alabaster jar, and it would be worth about an entire year's salary. And it would hang on a necklace, and really the whole point of this jar wasn't to be used, it was to show your status, and if you took the cork off, then it would kind of waft you with some smell. but you weren't supposed to pour it out. You weren't supposed to use it. It was really just a bragging right to say, look at what I can afford. And she can clearly afford it. And so being so awestruck by the sight of Jesus, so overcome with emotion, she breaks the rules of her community and she interacts with Jesus at the table. She provides the hospitality that the Pharisee didn't. And more than that, I think she gave everything in that moment. Because she would be judged because of her actions. She would be ridiculed by her community. She would alienate herself from this religious group that she was already alienated from. And the only way to access perfume from an alabaster jar is to break it. You can't pour anything out. The neck of the bottle is too thin. And so you got two options. You keep it around your neck and you have this status of wealth, or you smash it and you use the oil that is slowly coming out. And she breaks it. She gives it all in that situation. I think she gives everything of herself in that moment. I mean, if she was a prostitute, she wouldn't have the same level of wealth needed for her clients. If she was married to a wealthy tax collector, she would probably be alienating herself from her husband, or at very least, she would have some explaining to do, right? It would be like today if you sat down at dinner and you said, remember that person that, helped us shovel us out when our car got stuck? I gave them the car. It's that much money in that situation, and she just says, here you go. Jesus sits between these two people. One thinks he's holy. The other knows she isn't. One holds Jesus at arm's length, sets the tone, sets the rules, sets the parameters, and she goes in for a hug. More than a hug. So what did these people get out of their encounter with Christ? That's my question this morning. Both had an experience with Jesus, but they clearly didn't get the same thing out of it, right? It's like a learning experience. Just because everyone goes on that trip doesn't mean you get the same results. Some receive life change and others receive their required 30 hours of community service. Some people show up to this party and experience life change, and other people receive something entirely different. And so what do they get out of this experience? What did the Pharisee get out of his experience with Jesus? I think he got what he was expecting, which was an academic lecture. He said, Jesus, come to my house and let's chat theology. And so Jesus comes to his house, has a life-changing moment with a guest, and when the Pharisee doesn't understand what is happening, what does Jesus do? Jesus gives him a lecture. He says, let's talk theology. Let me explain what is going on. If you keep someone at arm's length, I think all you're ever going to get from them is arm's length. He expected to study Jesus, to understand his theology, and what did he get out of Jesus? He got some theology. He got a lecture. He got something to think about later on. And for each of us, as I've been reflecting this week, when we hold our own spirituality at arm's length, I think that's what we're going to receive. And maybe, this is a big claim, and so take it with a grain of salt, but maybe, I wonder if when I talk with friends of mine and acquaintances who maybe were a part of religion at one point in their life and now decided it's just not for them, I wonder if that's what was happening. If you hold your faith at arm's length, if you hold spirituality at arm's length, I just think that's what you're going to get out of it, and you're going to say, man, that did not work for me. It just didn't do anything. I didn't feel it. I didn't get any connection to it. When you put in an arm's length amount of connection, you're going to get an arm's length connection back. But what did this woman receive? Well, I'd like to think that this woman received a lot from this experience. She knew she was forgiven. She knew she was loved. I think she felt convinced that the way of Jesus was what she wanted to live her life in. The story says this. I have this quote here. "Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven." They're gone. Because she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. This woman gave everything, and in return, I really think she received so much more than she gave. I mean, that's the paradox of our Christian faith. You know, Matthew chapter 10 says, if your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you focus on God, you will find yourself and you'll find God. I mean, that's the paradox that we're believing into, to say, if you give, you don't lose it. You're going to receive so much more in that moment. And I think that's the moment this woman had with Christ. More than that, I think in that moment, she had this experience of awe. Do you know what I mean when I say awe? I mean, it's a word that we don't use often, but we've all experienced it. Awe is that feeling you get when you stand on a cliff or look out over the ocean at sunrise. It's that feeling you get when God feels tangible during worship or during prayer. It's watching an Olympian break a world record, or watching someone masterfully and emotionally play a cello. When a thunderstorm is so loud that you feel like the roof is going to break. You've had these moments before? It's awe. Awe can be wonder, it can be excitement, but it can also be fear. But what is similar between all moments of awe is that in that moment you feel the size of the universe that we live in. You both feel extremely small at that moment, and yet extremely cared for. Extremely connected. You feel like time freezes, and yet you're connected to all of creation. And I think that encounter with Christ that woman had was awe. A moment of awe. And so this week I've been reading these articles, and they've just been blowing me away. They're from Berkeley University, I think in California, and they've been doing all of this research on what are the benefits of awe in our lives. It's been so fascinating to look at, and I think the results are really remarkable. And I think they connect really well to this story in Luke 7 and to us sitting in a room this morning today. Here's the conclusion that they came up with. Experiencing moments of awe helps me stop focusing so much on myself and look to what and who is around me. The researchers, what they did is they found these subjects and they asked them some simple questions. They said, every day we want you to journal about your self-size. And so they actually had a picture of a stick figure, and they had these circles coming out, and they said, we want you to tell us how big you feel in that moment. And by self-size, they mean if you feel larger, then you feel more self-centered, you feel more self-focused, and if you feel smaller, then you feel more outward focused. You feel more compassion. You feel more connected to the world around you. You feel like you are an appropriate size compared to the size of the universe. And what they found is when they put them in situations where they could experience awe, their self-size shrunk a lot. And in moments where they weren't experiencing awe, their self-size increased a lot. These subjects then started to journal about their experience, and they came to some conclusions that the more awe I feel, the more I realize the world doesn't revolve around me. The more moments of awe I experience, the more I realize that I'm connected to something far greater than myself. That I don't need to focus on protecting myself. I need to focus on being vulnerable and opening up to my community. to opening up to nature, to opening up to the planet and to spirituality and to all of these amazing experiences. As the self shrinks, our world expands. It's a great quote that they said in one of the articles. As I give of myself, my feelings of connection grow. I think we can summarize by saying you get out what you put in. The more I give of myself, the more I connect myself to the world around me, the more I receive. They talked about increased joy, they talked about increased happiness, increased patience, less anxiety, these moments of awe and our understanding of the size that we view ourselves is connected in a really profound way. And so here at Avon, we have some covenants. Covenant promises or goals, and one of them is encounter, which I think fits pretty well this morning. We want to encounter God's presence in our lives and in our church. And how do we want to do that? By bringing our whole selves to our community. By bringing our vulnerable selves to this community and being receptive to God's presence. Not holding it at arm's length, or each other at arm's length, or our spirituality at arm's length, but bringing our whole selves into these moments. That when we experience a moment of awe together as a community, when we bring our whole selves, that's when powerful experiences happen. That's when life change happens on learning experiences. That's when amazing things happen on Sunday mornings, and when here's the natural result. When moments of awe are shared as a community, we want to go out. We want to serve. We want to be connected to our community, to our city, to the planet. Our self-size shrinks. As the self shrinks, our world expands. As I give of myself, my feelings of connection grow. And so why do we want to have these encounters with the divine? Because moments of divine awe connect us to this world that we've been given. As I reach up, I then start reaching out. As the self shrinks, our world expands. As we give of ourselves in our vulnerability and connect, then we can truly live our covenant of belonging, of encounter, of growth, of creativity. We can start to be a community of God.
Just stand and sing with it. As you get out of it what you put into it. Who knows what Hosanna means? It means, oh, save. Your sins are many. Just come running into that room and start washing Jesus' feet. Say Hosanna. Praises rising, hearts are turning to you. We turn to you. I'll try to get the words right. Holy Spirit. Hearts are yearning for
we see you, we find strength.